Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is Saturday, January 31st, 2015. We are just hours away from the return of Anderson Silva and Nick Diaz to the octagon. I'm going to say Nick Diaz too because a lot of people seem to forget that he's going to be there. I'm very excited about this fight, but before we start talking about UFC 183, let's talk about a couple other things that are happening in the UFC right now. First of all, did anybody catch that rant by Nate Diaz a little while ago going on about CM Punk and F this and F him and F the whole situation? I'd just like to take a moment for this public service announcement. Nate Diaz, nobody cares about you. Get over your jealousy. Listen, I'm not trying to pick a fight with you, but let's be honest with ourselves here. When is the last time you saw people getting excited for a Nate Diaz fight? You run your mouth about CM Punk, get into the octagon, and then get destroyed on leg kicks. Now, it's very easy to take shots at CM Punk, and I understand that he's a threat to you. But the fact of the matter is that nobody is talking about Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz, for those of you who don't know, will be the guy at the octagon tonight carrying Nick Diaz's bags, because he's always been in the shadow of his brother. And he's also going to be in the shadow of CM Punk when he hits the octagon. CM Punk is a polarizing figure. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. He's coming into this with virtually no fight experience, and he will be able to main event a pay-per-view. And I will go out and buy it. Now, I'm not the type of person who goes out and buys every pay-per-view, but I will go out and I will buy this one. When is the last time I bought a Nate Diaz pay-per-view? When's the last time Nate Diaz main evented a pay-per-view? Anyways, my point in this is just that, Nate, instead of chirping a guy, maybe just stick out your hand and say, welcome to the UFC. That's what class is. Now, let's take a moment and talk about Jon Jones. So, I kind of go back and forth with Jon Jones. Like, for example, when he fought Glover Teixeira, I thought his entrance was cool and we're going to see a great fight. The fight was okay, but I had no problems with Jon Jones. And then his fight comes up with Daniel Cormier. And call me a conspiracy theorist, but I kind of thought a lot of that pre-fight shenanigans was staged and was planned. Now, keeping aside all of the trash talk between both camps leading into that fight, when we started the fight, we saw them touch gloves, we saw an accidental eye poke, and then we saw them touch gloves again. And then the next thing you know, towards the end of the fight, Jones takes a couple of cheap shots in, and then the chirping starts all over again. Oh, I don't like you, Cormier, and all those people who bought these t-shirts, take them back. So it's hard to know which is the real Jon Jones that we're getting with. But the big story wasn't so much the fight, it's what happened after. Finding out that about a month previous to the fight, Jon Jones had tested positive for cocaine. Here is my problem. It isn't so much with Jon Jones. I'm not going to sit here and chirp somebody if they have issues with drugs or alcohol or anything like that. But my problem is not as much with Jon Jones. I'm not saying he gets a free pass, but I'm more so concerned with the Nevada State Athletic Commission and Dana White. So you knew that the guy had drugs in his system, but you still let him fight? And why? Because you could cash out on a huge payday. That's classy. Dana White, as much as I can say, you know what, he's the second coming of Vince McMahon in terms of he knows how to market, he knows how to hype up a fight, he's also the second coming of Don King. He's kind of turning into this sleazy promoter because when you look at other sports organizations, NFL, NHL, other different leagues, if there's an individual who has a drug issue, they're suspended. So far, no suspension for Jon Jones. A $25,000 fine, which I'm sure will put a huge dent in the $700,000 that he got for fighting and winning against Cormier at the beginning of January. How hard would it have been for Dana White to say, you know what? Unfortunately, we're going to have to pull him from this bout, and we're going to have to put in somebody else, and that fight's going to be for an interim championship. But he wouldn't do that because that'll be money out of his pocket. To me, it sends the wrong message to say to other fighters and to the kids, hey, cocaine's okay. So let's look at this. Josh Gordon is most likely going to get a year-long suspension from the NFL for violating their policy with alcohol. With alcohol. Not cocaine, but with alcohol. Now, this, of course, isn't Josh Gordon's first time getting suspended, so I have to bear that in mind as well. But still, you've got fighters in the UFC, Chael Sonnen being one of them, who was suspended and fired for steroid abuse. Steroid abuse. But cocaine is okay? Or is it just okay when it's Jon Jones that's taking it? Anyways, So my whole issue there, again, I'm not saying I'm giving Jones a pass, but I'm not trying to kick a guy when he's down, but I'm looking at the two entities that are profiting off of that the most. And it's not John Jones, it's the promoter. So the whole UFC organization kind of has to look at themselves long and hard in terms of what they're doing. Moving on, let's talk about class. Let's talk about champions with class. Can we please get GSP back? I miss GSP. I'm getting tired of all of this, silly trash talking and this whole fake manufacturedness, and I just want to go back to GSP. I had a hint of it a couple weekends ago when we saw the fight between Alexander Gustafsson and Anthony Rumble Johnson. Here are two guys who went into it, poured their hearts out in the octagon, shook hands before, shook hands after. I like that. Can we get back to that? Although, when you are talking about trash talking, I don't necessarily know if it gets any better than Conor McGregor. Now again, Conor McGregor is a guy who kind of made me flip a little bit. Here's a guy who comes out extremely disrespectful, extremely rude. But the one moment where I did give him a pass was when he went to shake Dennis Seaver's hands at the beginning of their fight, and Dennis Seaver wouldn't shake his hand, and then he flipped him off. Can't necessarily say I'm a big fan of somebody who won't shake your hand. I think that's a pretty classless thing to do, regardless of all the trash talk that's been leading up to it. And let me tell you this, if you're not going to shake somebody's hand, you better make sure that you kick their butt in the octagon, which Seaver clearly didn't. So let's talk about tonight's fight. Anderson Silva is going to be fighting Nick Diaz, the nice Diaz brother, if you ask me. Now, Nick Diaz is interesting because a few years ago he fought GSP, trash talk GSP, before the fight, during the fight, and even a little bit after the fight at the post-fight press conference. He's got this opportunity now as he's moved up to 185 from his normal 170 to take on arguably one of the best fighters in the UFC. Now, of course, tonight, if you watch the pay-per-view, you'll hear Joe Rogan say that Anderson Silva is the best. But if you listen to Joe Rogan a few weeks ago when he was talking about John Jones, he was the best. And if George St. Pierre was to show up at a fight next month, he'd be the best. There's a lot of bests in the UFC. Nonetheless, Anderson Silva has been a polarizing, absolutely dominant force in the UFC for years. And then he ran into a truck called Chris Weidman. Now, here's the thing with Chris Weidman. Both of his wins against Anderson Silva have asterisks beside them. The first fight, Anderson was acting like a jackass and he got caught with a punch. Not a lucky punch, he just got caught and knocked the heck out. The second fight, again, bad luck for Anderson because he went to throw a leg kick and broke his leg in a scene that has been played back so many times. We looked at that so many times and we thought to ourselves, this is the end of Anderson Silva. That incident was pretty much the equivalent of a near-death experience for a professional sports athlete. And now Anderson Silva is coming back and he's getting ready to fight again. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, Anderson's been kicking for months now and, the leg looks really good. Well, yeah, he's been kicking, but he hasn't been kicked. I'll be definitely checking out what Anderson's leg looks like tonight and how it'll hold up against the onslaught that'll be coming from Diaz. Now, you have to think to yourself, it'll be kind of a douche move for Diaz to go after the leg, but if you're in a fight, isn't that kind of what you have to do? So we'll see. So prediction time on this fight. Well, a couple of interesting things. Now, absolutely, Anderson Silva's been dominant, but even before he went down with the lucky punch and he went down with the quick punch, I should say, and he went down with the leg kick gone wrong. In those two fights, Weidman was still doing relatively well against him. Will Diaz have that same sort of luck? Here's an interesting fact. Diaz has lost before, absolutely, but his losses usually come by decision. It's very rare to see Nick Diaz get knocked out or TKO'd or submitted. Normally when he loses, it's by decision. So will Anderson Silva have the tools still to get this man to submit or to knock him out? I'm suspecting that he will, and I'm suspecting that we're going to see an Anderson Silva unlike we've seen before. I don't think we're going to see an Anderson Silva that's going to go into the octagon and mock his opponent and play games and run around and act like a fool. I think you're going to see a guy who's, as soon as that door shuts and hopefully Herb Dean says, go, you're going to see a guy who's going to be completely serious and is going to be extremely methodical and take it to his opponent. Because this fight is a statement fight for Anderson Silva. Nobody expects Diaz to win this fight, and I say that with all due respect. So if Diaz ends up losing this fight, not a big deal. If he wins this fight, holy jeez. But if Anderson loses this fight, then where does he go from here? What do you think about what's going on in the UFC right now? Please feel free to share your thoughts with me, as I'd love to hear them. CFL_fan on Twitter, Facebook.com/Woody Whittier, and WoodyWhittier.com. Thanks so much for checking out this vlog. I hope you have a chance to check out the fights tonight, and I'll talk to you soon.